Hey everybody, Kyle Goth here from GoatFilmReviews.com and the Goat Film Reviews YouTube channel. I've got my first reaction to the new Lee Cronin film, Evil Dead Rise. This is the fifth film in the Evil Dead franchise, and I guess you could say it follows up the 3 Stars television series for Ash vs. Evil Dead. Now, I'm catching this movie a little later than normal because I'm a little bit of a stickler for timelines, and I wanted to finish watching the 3 seasons of Ash vs. Evil Dead that I had not watched yet. So I ripped through those in a couple of weeks, made sure I could get down and check out this movie. So I'll say this, if you haven't seen Ash vs. Evil Dead, honestly, if you haven't seen any of the other Evil Dead films, you could probably walk right into this one and enjoy it for what it is. It does help to maybe know a little bit of the lore, but I think you could enjoy it, especially without the show. If you haven't had time to watch that, if you missed it when it was on Netflix, you can still check out this movie. Be totally fine. Okay, all that being said, this movie, people might take this how you will, but this movie felt to me like a Force Awakens situation for the Evil Dead franchise. In the sense that it does do a lot of similar elements and homages a lot of elements that are in the previous films and the show. There's a lot of homage, there's a lot of callbacks, there's a lot of reference to, and the film is also similar enough to the construction of the original movie. This is definitely a horror film as opposed to some of the horror comedy elements that the later Evil Dead films kind of got into. I always felt like the first film was a horror film, and then 2 onward got a little bit more comedic. Evil Dead 2013 went back to the horror, then the show went back to the horror comedy, and now we're kind of back to the straight horror again. So it felt kind of like The Force Awakens, where it was hitting all the similar beats. And to be fair, I like The Force Awakens. I think the movie is very entertaining. And in that way, too, I think The Evil Dead Rise is quite an entertaining film. When it does, I think when it wins most for me is when it is diverting from the established ideals that we had. And when it like homages in terms of a storytelling perspective. Lee Cronin finds an interesting way to connect this film to the lore that's established, because there's a lot of lore to this. I mean, honestly, there's 15 hours of TV shows, there's 8 hours worth of movies. There's a lot of lore to this, and you do have to find a way to wiggle into it a little bit and find your place. And I think Cronin does a really good job of that. Once he settles in, the film is highly entertaining. It's got some of those like moments you'll be talking about in the horror community for a while. I'll say this, I was not scared, and I did not feel the intensity that I expected to feel. I think a lot of people coming out of South by Southwest and coming out of the early, like, first weekend reactions to this film were talking about how intense and unrelenting this movie is. And I was kind of let down in that way, because the movie is very intense, but I didn't feel the intensity or the emotional fear, I guess, that was at play there. I didn't get the scares, and that's a tough thing to do. And honestly, it's going to pick and choose. I've seen a lot of horrific stuff before. Maybe it's just my inability to really register intensity based on all the horror films I've seen before. So I think for some people, this will be a lot to handle. But I think if you're a hardcore horror fan, if you're a guy that or a gal that's been hunting down, movies on the video nasty list for years, like I have, you probably won't feel the same way. I like the little bits of comedy that are peppered in. I like The Evil Dead most when it's horror. I like the horror elements more than the comedic elements of it. So that worked for me as well. Central performances, I'm going to forget a bunch of these names, but I wanted to make sure I mentioned Alyssa Sutherland, who plays the mother. She's the one who basically is the initial victim of the evil, and she's phenomenal. I mean, again, we're never going to see an Academy Award nomination for a demon possessed person from an Evil Dead sequel, but I think she's phenomenal in the film. She's great when she's her human persona. She's great when she turns. She is monstrous as this demonic possession version of herself, and I think she's the standout of the film. I like the other performances from the younger actors. I like how Cronin uses those younger actors too, because I was thinking to myself, we're not going to feel any mortal danger for them. They're kids in a movie. Like, we never feel mortal danger for younger people in films. I think the idea is just that we're supposed to be nervous for them because they're kids in a horror movie, but so rarely do we get the actual feeling like something could happen. And I think Cronin does does a solid job of putting the kids in mortal peril so that we feel concerned for them. Yeah, I really had a good time watching it. It felt to me a little bit like 2013's Evil Dead, where I think the exact same score for that film when I first walked out of it, and didn't watch it for a while. And then when I revisited it, I was like, yeah, this is really good. Like I started to appreciate it even more on multiple viewings. And I think that's probably how this one will do for me. Is I am excited to grab the 4K and watch it again at home and kind of really embrace that. Yeah, I enjoyed the film. I'm hoping that the follow-up to this movie will be closer in line to The Last Jedi, evolving and pushing the Evil Dead mythology forward into something else. I hope we do get a follow-up. I had a lot of fun with this one, even if it's like different characters, but we get another Evil Dead. Sure. Season 4 of Ash vs. Evil Dead. Give me that animated version. I'd love to see that. And for now, I'll just enjoy my video game for Evil Dead on Xbox. But yeah, let me know your thoughts about Evil Dead Rise. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Are you somewhere in between? And what's kind of your general preference for Evil Dead stuff? Do you prefer when it's in the horror realm or when it kind of goes to the horror comedy realm? This is such a weirdly confusing, like, tonal mess of a franchise, because some of them really deep into the horror and some go really deep into the comedy, and it's almost like whiplash that you get watching them all back to back like I have been. But let me know your thoughts down below. I'd love to hear what you thought about Evil Dead Rise. Do you think Lee Cronin should return to do a follow-up, or do you have another director that you think would make a great fit for an Evil Dead sequel? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Make sure while you're down there you check out or you like and subscribe. There are 2 free things that you can do that help to support the channel immensely, and you never miss new episodes of the show as they drop, which I do appreciate. Thank you all so very much. Go ahead and check out goatfilmreviews.com for my many written reviews. You can find Goat Film Reviews on Facebook. You can also follow me at Almighty Goatman on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. You can find my show, Kyle and Nick on Film, that I co-host with Nick Palachuk from the St. Paul Filmcast. We have new episodes every single week. Check out all those links. They're down in the description, and we'll see you next time.